be here. I'm going to be a bearer of difficult news. I'm going to pre-warn you this. I'm not going to talk about bullshit hope, but I'm going to take us through what I think is the scale of the challenge that we're facing and the scale of response required to that challenge. I think too often our conversations are aligned around what I would call marginal hope. Yeah, if we get 5% reduction in carbon, we're kind of there. We're not. We're really not. And I think we're going to have quite a substantive conversation about this. Where I want to go is, I want to talk about the scale of what we're facing, and I'm going to talk about the scale of the response that's required. Now I'm going to start, maybe just whilst the slide deck is coming. How many people here feel they are rationally involved and understand the climate crisis that we're facing? How many people? Put your hands up. You're rationally involved, you understand the climate. Don't be afraid, it's not a trick question. You put your hand up. Come on, quickly. We can get your arms going. Okay. Now, at the same time, I'm going to ask a really simple question. How many people here are vegans? It's not bad, I've been in rooms where it's just been about 2 hands. So those 2 questions, by the way, are not trick questions. If you're rationally involved with the climate crisis and you know the numbers, and you're not plant-based eating, it's a really interesting question. It really is an interesting dilemma. Because look at the numbers. They tell you pretty much there's no pathway for us without fundamentally changing our diet. So that's the discrepancy that we're living in. We think we know, but actually the gap to what we actually require is of an order of magnitude that we're not facing up to in our own personal lives. We're all kind of slightly Trump-like. And the more we recognize that, the easier this conversation becomes. The average UK house, right, as we build it now, has about 800 kilograms of embodied carbon per square meter. It's the average UK house. The best UK house, embodied carbon, is 150 kilograms per meter squared of embodied carbon. The best retrofit house is 125, a deep retrofit, 125 kilograms of embodied carbon per square meter. It takes 21 years to make that house net zero. Right? So you release carbon, it takes 21 years to bring it back. The challenge that we face is we've got to get to 6.3 kilograms of embodied carbon per square meter. 150, 6.3. Now the scale of what we're talking about is that. How many homes do you think the UK can afford to build? The UK signed up for the Paris Agreement, even with this government didn't let us down from that position. How many homes do you think the UK can afford to build if we're going to stay in the 1.5 degree target? Let's have some numbers. Government targets are 300,000. I had a 0, 10,000, minus 1 million. Well, that's probably it. So, if you just take the current allocation, brilliant. If we just take the current allocation of carbon, as we've got it in the industry, it's about 14,000 homes a year. And the reason why I bring that up, 14,000 homes is all we can afford to build. And that excludes doing retrofit. So if we take that carbon and use it for retrofit, which is a pretty smart idea to do, we have a completely different question on our hands. And the reason why I bring that up is the scale of the numbers that we're facing are of order of magnitude that change our reality. How do we build spatial justice in those questions? So every government I talk to, and I've talked to some of the new potential next government, and I sort of said, well, you're talking about 350,000 homes. That's your carbon budget. Tell me how. He said, we've got to build the 350,000 200,000 homes. And what that means is the UK exports its injustice around the world. And I think we're not being honest about the scale of the gap. And this is my number one point. So, I'm not going to do dark matter stuff, I'm going to really jump in. So what does this decade of transition look like? This is what happens if we hit between 2 and 2.5 degrees in inhabitable human lease zones. All the deep red stuff goes outside the habitable. So when people talk about billions of people on the move, what they're referring to is inhabitation that's no longer human viable. That's at 2 and 2.5 degrees. Where are we headed? Current policy frameworks push us at least at 3 degrees, conservatively. 3 degrees, conservatively. If you talk to military people, they say it's pushing us closer to 6 degrees. There's a range. The IPCC is a conservative estimate. We're heading towards at least 3 degrees. What does a 3-degree planet look like? You've heard numbers like 3 degrees. 3 degrees means 5 degrees land temperature rise, means 8 degrees summer peak temperatures in places like Birmingham. 3-degree average, 5-degree land, 8-degree in urban environments. So what is a 32-degree temperature at summer and summer load? It's 40 degrees in summer in Birmingham. I just don't think we're understanding the implications. 1.7 to 1.9 degrees between those temperature rises, and that's predictable in the next 5 to 10 years, we will lose one of the major food baskets. Right? So just for us to understand the scale. So food resilience is almost certainly going to be one of the big things that we're going to have to do. Why am I talking about food in a conference like this? I tell you why. Because our food systems are currently driving the greatest loss of forestry around the world. As we change our food systems, we don't build the biomaterial economy that we need to be able to actually build the green buildings that we're talking about. We don't have the loop. The land use transition is fundamental to building the biomaterial economy. Now, here's why the biomaterial economy is not just a global conversation. What's the difference between a global timber supply chain and concrete production of housing? 5%. A global timber supply chain versus concrete traditional forms of construction has a 5% reduction in carbon. So in order to move towards a timber supply chain, it has to be bioregionally sourced, and you have to build a bioregional industry to be able to produce your sequestered carbon, and then you've got to be able to store it for 200 years. Store that carbon for 200 years. So this is not like I build a timber building and it's 50 years down the line and burn it and it's all over. We have to sequester that carbon for 200 years, which means that we have to produce buildings which are not programmatically driven. They have to be programmatic, like Georgian houses, like some of the houses in Edinburgh, which can turn into offices and other things. They have to continuously last in a different way, which means our pension funds have to fund buildings not based on program, but actually the material assets. Which means we have to build material registries which sequester and organize our material economy in radically different ways. Why I'm laying this out is because I'm not laying this out to be hopeless. I'm laying this out so that we can actually embrace the scale of the transition we face. And we're almost certainly going to have to delaminate our economy from material consumption and to be able to actually delaminate it from the scale of energy. Up there, you will see actually population, carbon emissions, and material footprint. They almost correlate one-to-one with GDP. We are going to have to change our material economy, shift it into effectively intangibles, and we have to de-link it certainly from energy, and I'll tell you why. I think this. So between 2019 and 2020, the global increase in energy, the global increase in energy demand, right, was greater than all the installed renewables. The increase in energy demand was greater than all the installed renewables. Full stop. So when people talk about renewables, yes, but let us not imagine the quantum of transition we're facing. I'm going to materialize this for you. An electric truck, electric lorries, they're often talked about. A charging station for an electric truck and lorry is equivalent to 30,000 hometowns. That's the energy requirement for that infrastructure. So, when I've been talking in Switzerland will be building electric trucks, but they don't have the energy grid to supply actually the energy side of that equation. Why I'm saying this is that this is a fundamental transition. So if you look at copper supply, I'm being really boring and material. Copper supply. Over the next 10 years, if you look at the demand on copper and the actual copper mines that we have available, the sources of copper that we have available over the next 10 years, remember it takes 10 to 15 years to open up a new mine. And remember, mines are responsible for most of our ecological destruction, 80 to 90%. But it takes 10 years. We just don't have the copper supply to do the electrification that's required to get to net zero globally. Yes, European cities might be able to do some of that. That would be at the expense of actually many global cities being able to do that. So I want us to understand how the decisions we are making upstream have downstream implications of our ecological sources, have downstream implications of access to minerals. All these things are linked in how we make these decisions. This was my point about national number of homes and carbon budgets. So these are the numbers. 800, 150, we've got to get to 6.3. 6.3. That is not a 5% reduction in carbon from the best low carbon technologies that we build. That's a 95% reduction. Many of you are business people. If I was to say, change 95% of your business model, what would you do? And say, mate, I'm going to rip up my business and start a new one. You don't do 95% re-gearing of a business. Our problem is we're trying to re-gear a business which has got a 95% difference that we've got to get to. And when you start to look at it, it means that we're going to have to changing typologies of our buildings, to massively increase intensification of use. We're going to have to change our theories of comfort. Most of you are sitting here in coats. Great. We're going to have to learn how to wear coats. We're going to have to learn actually our material innovation. It's going to take us 30 years to build the bioregional supply chains to be able to build up our material economy. We're going to have to build circular material economies locally to be able to actually build this out. We're going to have to talk about sharing our buildings in radical different ways to be able to get the efficiency. And we're going to have to build the ecological services into our cities and places. Only all of that, maybe we get to those numbers. ACAN is doing a really interesting talk in the next few days. 5 years ago, I would never anticipated this conversation. The conversation is, should UK stop building? That's based on these numbers. And I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to get us all to understand the scale of what we're facing. And the scale is an invitation for a quantum of innovation that's going to be of the order of a land use transition that we've not seen since the Industrial Revolution. That's what we're really talking about. This is my point about food, right? That is all the wild animals in the world, that green dot. That's all the wild birds, like zebras, elephants, think of it all. That's them, that's sheep. That's cattle. So when you start to look at the food systems and the level of CO2 destruction it's doing into our world, and the level of soil erosion, and you look at actually the level of impact it's having on our planet, that's what I meant. And this is not like, oh my God, you guys need to be morally different. I'm not talking about morals here. I'm just telling you what the numbers are. This is the thing about the total energy, global energy supply. So we have to replace natural gas, oil, coal, all of this stuff with some form of renewable energy supply, the quantum of the moves that we're talking about. And also be recognized, it used to take 1 barrel of oil to produce 100 barrels of oil equivalent of energy in the 1920s. That was the gearage of energy. 1 barrel of oil of energy produced 100 barrels of oil. Now, 1 barrel of oil of energy produces 5 to 7 barrels of oil. So we've already lost peak energy intensity in the system. So the availability of energy and the gearage of energy has massively been reduced over the last 50 years. We went through peak in the 1970s. And the targets. This is Finland. I think it got some really good numbers. Finland, unfortunately, has one of the highest per capita carbon use. Telecommuting, start using a heat pump. Once you've done all those things, if you imagine all the white bit that's left and the pink bit that's left, we don't know how to do that yet. Right? So once you've done all the basics, using public transport, choose local food, buying recycled products, vegetarian diet, solar collector, telecommute, we just don't know how to do that, the rest of it. And I think it's important for us to recognize the quantum. This is the whole thing between the current policies. That's where they get us, 2.7 to 3.1 degrees, conservative. So, Denmark already has run out of its 1.5 degree carbon budget. Right? What does it do? And I'm just using this as examples for us to start to think about what this means. How many cities are running carbon treasuries? How many towns are running carbon treasuries? We're going to have to start to think about this stuff in fundamentally different ways to be able to make some of these moves. And the biodiversity issues are not a side issue. The extinction rate events are 1,000 times greater than normal. That's the level of biodiversity losses that we're seeing around the world. And the UK is one of the most nature-deprived locations in the world. So when you start to look at this stuff, what you start to see is that many of the crises, one of the things I want to sort of set forth is that climate breakdown, and Sarah used that word very accurately, the reason why it's called climate breakdown, not climate change, is that what we're losing is the stability of the climate. And what we're having is high levels of atmospheric energy in the system, which is going to produce volatility, storms that we're facing outside. That volatility and loss of predictability, the loss of predictability means we're going to lose insurability. The loss of insurability, and you're seeing this in places like Nova Scotia, Florida, California, Australia. So for example, to insure a house in Australia right now, parts of Australia, it's costing 500,000 Canadian dollars a year to insure a house because they expect it to burn down every year and have to be replaced. So the loss of insurability means you lose capital markets. Rufus is here, and I think it's really great that Rufus is here because he's one of the best finance people in the space. And when you start to think about that, we are in a pathway to actually some of that erosion of loss of ability to deal with that. Planetary boundaries, I'm going to move through some of this stuff because I'm sure I'm running out of time. This point, make a note of this. This is big. It will stop our capacity to be able to allocate. So the relevance gap. So what I put forward to you is we're going to have to change our material economy. We're going to have to move to economies which are intangibly driven. We're going to have to shift towards circular economies. Now, everyone thinks about circular economies. I hope this is the next slide. Yeah, this one. Denmark, one of the circular economies in the developed world. 4%. I'm going to say it loud. 4%. We need to be closer to 80%. right? I'm not saying it to scare us, I'm just trying to call out the scale of the transformation that's required. So when we start to think about this, we're going to have to be quite radical about some of these things. So, we're going to have to move towards the intangible economy. We're going to have to drive durability. Like I said, timber sequestered for 200 years, timber buildings. Okay, how do you make them work? We're going to have to build a bioregional biomaterial economy. A bioregional biomaterial economy doesn't work if you have global supply chains and that stuff. We have to rebuild, I think, our human economy. We're going to have to rebuild our nutrition frameworks. And we're going to have to build nature-based services and nature-based environments, bioregional regenerative environments. All of that stack is the scale of what's required to be able to build the futures that we're talking about. And we have to think much more creatively about how we use our existing built environment assets. 18% or 18% of European real estate is vacant. 18%. 33% is underutilized. We're going to have to think quite hard about how we reduce those vacancies and radically increase the utilization of our buildings rather than just allocating more material and carbon into our built environment. And it's going to be 4 stories. What's the economy of that? How do you actually tax non-use of buildings? I think we have to live in a different way. What is the justice framework around? And all of these things, in a way, all the constraints in terms of material cycles. So, I think we have to recognize that living in entanglements of value. This was a piece of work we did around, and it's just to illustrate this, an underperforming private house, how it creates costs for local authorities and other partners in lots of different ways. So, a badly performing energy house creates healthcare costs, pneumonia for kids, lack of presence of kids in schools, all those social costs are attributed. So how do we do investments in the right way that allow us to make these transitions in radical formats? A tree, again, I'm just giving you examples. An urban tree, why did Sheffield cut down its trees? It was an accounting issue, not a political issue. Because trees, after 10 years, they have insurance costs and they have maintenance costs, and they rise. But their ecological benefits are not priced in anyway. So it's better to chop down trees after 10 years and replace them with young saplings, just from an accounting issue. However, the ecological benefits of trees, in terms of 12 degrees worth of cooling, in terms of actually addressing flood risk management if you do urban forests, in terms of addressing asthma rates if you don't just build male trees. Here's a quite little fact. 97% of trees planted are male trees. Why? Because they are lower maintenance, yet they deliver us higher levels of asthma. And the asthma costs are off-sourced to our NHS budgets. Because we're not doing integrated investments. We're not doing integrated management of these things. So we're outsourcing all the liabilities to different budgets. A tree-lined street puts £7,000 to £10,000 on housing. It also reduces the maintenance cost of roads if you get it right, because actually road damage is summer. And flood damage are affected. So these are integrated issues, and we have to start to think about them. I'm going to jump past this. One of the things I want to maybe quickly present, which I think is important, I think one of the big things that we're going to have to do, and we're doing work around how do you finance a timber supply chain? Not a timber product, not a timber process, but the complete loop of timber. I think what we're going to have to start to think about is entangled goods as a key value proposition. One of the first pieces of work that we did was around the High Line in New York. And why we did High Line is I think one of our big investments is going to be in common goods. Tree canopies, material economies, these are all going to be quasi-common good investments. Even, I would argue, a solar grid, battery, and a heat pump as a piece of infrastructure will need to be an infrastructure level investment in place, as opposed to treating it as a product level investment, just because people can't afford the money to be able to do it at a unit level cost level. That's going to be a new form of public infrastructure investment that are going to be required. And that's exactly the work that we're doing. But in order to finance that, this is really important. So this is the work that we did on High Line. High Line cost $178 million to make. Entirely done by grant. It generated, I think the numbers are, it generated in close to 3.48 billion of land value uplift for Highline in New York. All that land value was privatized. Cost 178 million to build, spilt over large amounts of value which was privatized. Common goods are going to have to need a new class of business models to be able to make those investment cases. And our common good investments are going to be critical for dealing with climate change. So just to bear that in mind as a key thesis. This is all the stuff around housing and other things. And I extend the conversation about price, and I'm running out of time, but I just want to make this point. I'm wearing a shitty shirt, I don't wear expensive shirts. But this is about £35, £40, right? If you were to price in social and environmental costs on this shirt, actually price them fully in, this shirt is close to 250 to 450 pounds. 35 goes to 250 to 450 pounds. Delicious. Why I'm saying this? That means 9x of that cost I've externalized to the world. Carbon, soil damage, water impacts, people inequality, I've externalized those costs. As we start to internalize these costs back, our theory of what is price, our theory of how we hold goods, our theory of how we construct our economy will be different. Now imagine a true cost of a house. A true cost of a house. What does affordability look like for that? How do we build viable true cost models which actually build a just economy? That's an important question that we're going to have to deal with. Because it's not going to be, I will not be buying a shirt a year. It's just not going to work. We've got a different economy. My parents didn't buy a shirt a year, right? 5 shirts a year occasionally. It's not how it works. As we start to price that back in, we are moving into a different material economy at a substantial level. And that requires governance of these economies in really radical different ways. Otherwise, these will become rent-seeking systems. Rent-seeking systems. Right? Infrastructure, all those kind of trees of infrastructure, deep retrofitting, mental health, these are all forms of going to be infrastructure scale investments that are going to be critical. They are all rent-seeking capacities. The governance of them is really important. There are real challenges around doing these investments. So if you do an energy retrofit, the benefits of it are not just energy, the benefits of our health outcomes, the benefits are actually, if you get the energy model right, lowers the cost of living, it has all sorts of secondary benefits in terms of reduction of grid costs, all sorts of secondary benefits. We're going to have to start to think about how we monetize those benefits to create a new class of business models. And these are real problems to be able to make these things work. We've got uncrystallized risks. Most of our climate change risks are not yet crystallized on balance sheets. You know, Scottish Water, any of the big agencies are not crystallizing those risks. If you don't crystallize those risks, you can't do the investments to manage those risks. Don't take my word for it. Read the recent report by the Institute of Actuaries, March 2023, talks about this. I'm gonna, how are we doing? One minute, yeah. So, in terms of dealing with this stuff, the numbers that we're talking about are extraordinary. But going back to my original stuff, we don't have the labor force, we don't have the minerals, right? And we don't certainly currently have the financial packages. So what does actually the rebuilding and the retrofitting of our built environment really look like? How do you deal with this stuff in radical formats? How do you build the upskilling of the movement? How do you actually build new forms of hybrid capital business models? We're not going to all do it in single classic energy-based business models. They're going to be different. How do you deal with that cascade of innovation required? How do you actually change? There's a piece of work we're doing in Denmark on reimagining comfort in the 21st century. How do we reimagine our theory of comfort? How do we actually build shared provisions infrastructures? How do we actually rebuild our material economy in radical formats? These are going to be hard, critical things. And it's going to require, this is just something in terms of dealing with this, shifting the innovation landscape. What this requires us to be able to do is a whole stack of things. If you're going to build super lightweight, build on rooftops, do not build on soil. Do not build on more green land. We need to preserve our soil capacity. It's going to change everything around us. Soon, I think we'll be issuing with Civic Square a 3-degree neighborhood vision which pulls a lot of this stuff together, which I think will be really interesting in a period of time. Which pulls some of this stuff together on what the future retrofit of neighborhoods look like, what the scale of interventions need to be at every level. So, I'm not going to talk any further, but I'm going to close here. But my big point here is that it's really important for us to look both upstream as to what we need to do, but also downstream as how we're going to do it. And these entanglements are changing what we think is the innovation landscape. The innovation landscape that we perceive it is not going to be like the innovation landscape we've had for the last 30 years. We're going to have to change what we innovate and how we innovate in order to deal with the scale of the transition we're forcing. And over the next 40 years, it's not linear. It's going to be bumpy, like I talked about copper. There's virtually infinite copper supply in the world in reserve terms. We just don't have access to it, and the ecological effects of it will be significant. So it's going to be a lumpy, highly inflationary 40 years. Inflation will not come down. We will see inflation stay high, driven by shocks in supply chains and availabilities of some of these infrastructures. That means we're going to have to find new ways of financing some of these transitions in radical formats. And my big request to us all is follow the numbers up and downstream. And I'm not saying this to scare us, I'm saying this because I think this changes what we make and how we make. And that's an invitation with great potential to make actually the next UK. And I think it's of an order of magnitude of the Industrial Revolution. It will change our land use, it will change our material economy, it will change our energy base, and it will change the human contribution that we're all providing. So with that, I thank you for your patience and